I spent about 9 months living in New York, and back in March, when I heard about how the pandemic was really exploding in New York, I wasn't surprised at all because of the social behaviors that I used to observe on a daily basis in New York. I would be on the subway, and people just didn't care about any sort of hygiene. I remember one time when I got onto the subway, and there was a huge crowd in one side of the subway, and one of the cars was completely empty, and I was really tired. I was very overworked at the time. I thought, oh, all right, I'll just go over there and lay down. And everybody tried to block me from going into that subway car, and I couldn't tell what was going on. It turned out the heater wasn't working, but I didn't care. I was tired, and I had plenty of clothing on. And the fact that people would rather jam up with each other than to get some extra space. And it wasn't just that. Sometimes on the subway, see, I have dietary restrictions, and I need to be very careful about food crumbs. And somebody would be eating, and I would tell them to please be a little bit more mindful about getting crumbs everywhere. And people would be very upset at that remark. People would say, it's none of your business, it's not my problem. And it just goes to show how little we are, how little awareness of what we have, what we put in our mouths, number one, and number two, what impact it could have on other people. And other times, somebody would be getting ready to shake hands with me, but they have something that they were eating on their hands, and I would kind of blow it off and give them an elbow instead. And people would just take really big offense at that. Nowadays, it's pretty common knowledge not to shake hands, but at the time, people took great offense in that. When I moved to Seattle, these things, they still existed. They weren't as rampant. People seemed to understand that if you had differences in your lifestyle, and you go to a restaurant and you ask about food ingredients, and you almost have to give a lecture on what you're trying to avoid. People are much more receptive to that and willing to learn about that. In New York, everybody lives their own way. The whole mantra of we're all in this together really doesn't apply in New York. It doesn't really apply in Seattle, but it applies a little bit more. It applies much more when I travel to the Rocky Mountains like Montana or Denver. It does seem like we do have a much more we're all in this together mantra. I traveled to a number of other countries where I've tried exotic foods, and I have to question people about ingredients, obviously. And I actually got very ill when I was traveling in Warsaw, Poland. I had tried some raw fish. And I ended up getting food poisoning, and I ended up in the hospital. And obviously, I have language barriers. And when I tried to ask about food ingredients at the hospital, it was very confusing. I ended up having to type something into Google Translate. And see, when we think about Poland, we like to think that they slack off, right? They're communists. They don't work hard like Americans. You know what? I think Americans, they work hard, but they don't work very smart sometimes. How many times in America have you tried to ask somebody to do something that was a little bit outside the scope of their job, and they're like, it's not my job, right? Try going to any city in America and try to ask somebody to borrow the bathroom, right? They'll say it's not for the public. They don't even look at you and make any sort of... if you look like somebody who's about to shoot drugs in the bathroom, sure, but they don't even look at you. It's a black box answer. They don't let the public use the bathroom, right? They don't want to think outside the box and do a little bit beyond their job, right? When I was in the hospital in Warsaw, and I mentioned the food ingredients, I couldn't even speak their language. I had to type it into the computer. And still, the nurse on hand finds out, and she sends somebody out to go get food for me. And that was a really warm experience for me, even though I had to explain myself. Here in the United States, you would never expect that. I've been very worried about getting COVID-19 and having to be locked up in a hospital because of something like that. Because even though I can speak the language here, I might run into it's not my job kind of philosophy. When I traveled in... China 2 years ago now, actually. I was on my way to a conference in Macau, and I had a layover in China, and I had a good 24 hours in China, and I left the airport to go stay in a hotel over there, and I took a walk. This was in Shanghai, and I went to a wet market, and I was going to try some exotic animals, but I couldn't find out if they put MSG. I don't think it was bat soup, by the way, but it was some exotic animal. But when I tried to ask the vendor if they put MSG in their cooking, he laughed at me, and I walked away. And I'm so glad I did, because had I eaten that, and I would have never felt clean again, given what happened a few months later. But I hope this gives us a wake-up call for us to rethink our hygiene habits, our social habits, and just how we treat each other in our everyday lives. Thanks for watching.